From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Landscaping our yards to be beautiful and wildfire resistant. Homeowners in the Colorado foothills are used to the threat of wildfire. But after the Marshall Fire hit Louisville and Superior in 2021, some homeowners are taking wildfire mitigation more seriously. And how you landscape your yard is a big part of that work.
Yeah, we're getting questions every week about this. This is something homeowners are concerned about, and they really need a lot of information to make sure that they're creating a defensible space to prevent another wildfire.
That's Tommy Roth. He's a home horticulture coordinator for the Colorado State University Extension, who's joined us in the past for gardening advice. And with spring planting season right around the corner, he talked with me about what he pictures when he thinks of a yard with fire-wise landscaping.
So what I picture in my head is a beautiful space that serves multiple purposes, right? So gardens and landscapes can be beautiful, but it can also be ignition resistant and defensible.
And what kind of plants do you picture in a fire-wise space?
You can plant lots of different things. I would picture in a native landscape lots of plants that have a low flammability, things like yarrow, plains coreopsis, beautiful wildflower, things like a Rocky Mountain geranium or a prairie smoke, something maybe like a lupine. These are things that are going to have lower flammability ratings, and they're going to be able to withstand ignition more so than some of our other plants.
Okay, so if you're wondering what you need to protect your home, Tommy has a few big picture tips. First, you should visit wildfirerisk.org and see which risk zone your home is in. Basically, living in the foothills means higher risk for wildfire, and living in a city means lower risk. Based on that, if you decide to do some defensive landscaping, Tommy says the key is to think of the area around your house in terms of 3 protective zones.
Zone 1 is the area between 0 and 5 feet from your house. And in this zone, we want to have nothing flammable. So if you have a wooden fence that attaches to your house, it might be a good idea to replace that fence with a metal portion that extends 5 feet from your house. Additionally, if someone has a wooden deck, a wooden patio, might be a good idea to convert that into something made of stone or metal to avoid that burning.
And zone 2 is the next area out. That's the area that's between 5 feet and 30 feet from the house. What kinds of landscaping and plants make sense here?
So in zone 2, it's going to be important to make sure that plants are in clumps. So we want to avoid a situation where there's just plants everywhere. There's large groups of plants. They're all touching. We want to avoid situations like that. So people are going to want to landscape in groups. For example, if you want to have a tree, maybe don't plant some shrubs directly around the tree. Or if you want to have wildflowers, don't landscape your entire backyard with wildflowers. Have wildflowers in a clump, and then have that clump be at least 10 feet from the other landscape clump groupings.
Okay, so keeping plantings a little far away from each other. What about mulch? In that zone 2 area, is it okay to have wood mulch in my gardens and maybe around my trees?
It's probably better to have rock mulch in those areas. So it's best to avoid wood mulch and pine needle mulch, as those can become quite flammable. So rock mulch, it's not going to become flammable. So that's probably the best thing that homeowners can use.
And I'll mention zone 3, although you need to have a pretty big property for this to apply to you. This is the area between 30 and 100 feet from your home. What should be my strategy in this area?
Right. So in this area, in zone 3, it's going to be important to maintain this zone and make sure that there's not large groupings of dead grasses. Make sure that trees are limbed up from the ground. We want to avoid ladder fuels. So we want to make sure that tree limbs aren't actually touching the ground. We want to remove those up the tree so that the fire has a harder time spreading from the ground to the tree. We also want to avoid certain plant species. So things like junipers or other things that are really, really high in resinous content also should probably be avoided in all 3 zones.
It sounds like having a fire-wise yard, Tommy, is about getting rid of everything I like about my garden. What is your take on that?
So I would say that's not necessarily the case. I think homeowners need to assess their risk zone and see, am I in a high risk area? If you're not, you might not have to remove anything. Also, you can consider planting ignition resistant plants.
Mm.
So a lot of our native plants are actually quite ignition resistant. And this is something that you'll be able to find on CSU Extension's website. We have a list of common native plants, and then we also have a flammability rating. In the long run, it's definitely going to be better to consider using some of these Firewise practices.
When I think of the Marshall Fire in Boulder County a few years back, it strikes me that wildfires are no longer a concern only for mountain homeowners. What do you say to callers who are concerned about wildfire and hope that landscaping differently could make a difference?
But yeah, I would say that there is a lot of research showing that creating these 3 types of defensible zones around your house could actually prevent your home from burning. But I also kind of want to reassure people and say that it depends on where you live. It really depends on the location of your home. And I would just say, see what risk area you're in, see how much risk there is, and then take steps to mitigate that risk.
And how effective will my efforts at Firewise Landscaping be if, let's say, I do this work, but my neighbors don't take these steps?
I think it's important to work together as a neighborhood to prevent fires. So if you take all these steps, you do the zones, you're very vigilant, you have great landscaping practices, but your neighbor doesn't, that's going to increase your risk. So I think if you live in an HOA, it could be a good idea to maybe bring this up at your HOA board meetings. And I also think it could be important to, connect with your neighbors and see, what are they doing to make their yards more defensible against fire, and try and work together as groups, because it really is kind of a collective issue where we need to tackle this as a group.
Tommy Roth is a home horticulture coordinator with Colorado State University Extension. We'll include a link to their website with Firewise planting recommendations in our show notes and at KUNC.org. And if you have questions about planting fire-resistant plants or anything you'd like to try out in your garden this year, send us an email at noco@kunc.org. We'll ask our friends at CSU Extension about it. That email is also a great way to connect with us if you have feedback. Matthew reached out after hearing our episode on the truly epic sunburns that can come on a fresh powder day in Colorado. He pointed out that not all new fresh snow is powder. That term is reserved for that light, very dry snow that comes on colder days. He says powder days have always been rare, and due to the changing climate, I fear that people will soon think of powder days as they think of unicorns. Matthew, thanks so much for your email. And we'd love to hear from you too. If you have thoughts on a recent episode of In The NoCo, or an idea for something you think we should cover, let us know. Drop us a line at noco@kunc.org. That's NOCO@kunc.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.